Looks like it's
Finally.
flying.
Okay, well, it is now 7:02 on January 12th, and I'm gonna call this Transportation Policy Board meeting to order. And can we go around and, Bina, can you do some introductions here and check everyone in?
Yes, please. I will. I'll be doing that today, Mr. Chair.
Great.
So, City of Olympia, and I'll just call out the member name, and if you could then introduce yourself.
All right, good morning, everybody. Danny Madrone with the Olympia City Council.
And City of Lacey,
Andy Ryder, the mayor of Lacey, and the chair.
and Tumwater,
Peter Davies, City of Tumwater.
and Rainier,
Ron Kemp, City of Rainier Council.
Tenino,
John O'Callahan representing the great city of Tenino.
Inner City Transit,
Don Melnick, Authority Board Member, thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Good.
Morning. Port of Olympia,
Yeah, Port of Olympia, represented by Joe Downing. Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
and Washington State Department of Transportation,
Good morning. This is Gayus Sonoy, Olympic Region Planning and Program Manager.
and our business representative,
Good morning. I'm Renee Radcliffe Sinclair.
and Thurston County,
Good morning and Happy New Year. This is Carolina Mejia, Thurston County Commissioner for District 1.
and I believe that is all of the members that I see at this point. Is there anyone who I have not called? Okay. For staff from Inner City Transit, we have Ann Freeman Manzanares, Jessica Gould, and Rob LaFontaine. From Olympia, we have Sophie Stimpson. From Tumwater, Mary Heather Ames. From TRPC, you've got me, Mark Daly, Karen Parkhurst, Bina Tabbitt, Paul Brewster, Dave Reed, Katrina Van Every, Theresa Julius. And I believe that's it at this point.
Casey.
Oh, and Casey Mock. Yes, which actually I can do that right now. So Casey, are you able to turn on your camera? So we have a new assistant planner that just joined us on Monday. Really excited. Casey Mock came to us from the city of Yelm most recently. And she went to Western, degree in geography, and she's going to be working on a bunch of different things here. And so really excited to have her here. Casey, do you want to say hello to the Transportation Policy Board?
I can. I didn't set up my fancy headset yet. Is
That's
there
right.
feedback coming through?
Nope, you sound
No.
okay.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Very excited to meet you. I don't know how much I'll be working with TPB, but today I'll be listening in and just getting to know all of you. So happy to be here.
Thanks for joining us this morning.
Mark, I think Michelle Swanson is here from City of Olympia
Oh,
as
great.
well.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, I think that's it, Mr. Chair.
You have any report or announcements for today, Mark?
Yeah, just a reminder, first of the year, we have a lot of changes with members, and we would want to have a member and an alternate for each of the members. So if you haven't already, if you could please let Berlina know who your primary member and your alternate will be for 2022, that would be greatly appreciated. In terms of the trail plan update, the TAC, there was public comment at our last meeting about the trails plan update and policies around how we're managing the trails. And our technical advisory committee will be discussing those existing policies, procedures, and strategies, and looking for ways to address issues, especially associated with closures and detour routes. And so the TAC will be talking about that. Also, for the regional trails plan update, we'll be convening the advisory committee for its first meeting on January 14th. So we've got that moving forward at this point. And If you have any specific bills that your jurisdiction, we're in session, and Karen Parkhurst and I'll be tracking what's going on in session. So if there are particular bills that you're monitoring during the session, if you could please let Karen know, so that we can also make sure that we're tracking those as well, because we want to make sure that we are covering the bills that are of interest to our members. All right, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next up on our agenda is the approval of today's agenda. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved. John O'Callahan.
Second, Danny.
Been moved in second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there any objections? Then that motion passes and we've adopted today's agenda. Next up is the approval of the meeting notes from December 8th.
So moved.
Is there a
Second.
Second?
Second,
Move-
Renee.
Move from John and second from Renee. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 Is there anyone opposed? Then that motion carries as well. And now we're on to the public comment period. We didn't have anyone sign up for public comment today. Is that still the case?
Chair Kara Mesmer is here. She had sent in some information for the board. She doesn't want to speak, but she is in attendance.
Okay, then that will be a part of our official record. Now we'll go on to our next agenda item, which is our 2022 meeting schedule. Turn this over to Karen.
Okay. Hi, I'm happy to see you all this new year. And this is just basically a routine agenda item for January. And we look at the calendar to see what is when our meetings are going to be. We meet on the second Wednesday of the month at 7 a.m. And basically, if the calendar was part of your packet, we also do not meet in August. We have a time off that month, as does our council. And so today we're just basically looking at that. There's a couple days always that are close to holidays, and sometimes the board moves the meeting because of that. We're open to that discussion, but basically what we're deciding today is what our schedule will be for the 2022.
Can I get any entertainers to move the meeting time?
To move the meeting time? No.
Damn it.
I forgot to say, could we please mute the chair's audio?
I just have a quick question. We're mostly scheduled for the second Wednesday, but April, it's the first Wednesday. Is there a reason for that, or is there an error?
I saw that as well.
I think that was an error on my phone. Yeah.
Okay, it will be the second Wednesday.
So it'll be April 13th, not the 6th. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Ugh, you guys kill me every year. Just kill me. Do you need a motion?
Yes, we do.
Move approval of the meeting agenda, meeting calendar.
I second.
As amended, right?
Yeah, as amended.
Amended.
Yeah.
Right.
So, second, is there any further discussion? Go ahead, Don. You have something?
Nothing. I just was raising my hand to say I second.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? I don't know why. How did this get started at 7 a.m. all those years ago? This is the only intergovernmental board I'm on that meets so early, but I'll take it again as I do it. All in favor of that of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed besides myself? No. I'm not.
Are you going to vote in post?
No. I'll grudgingly go with it. Then that motion carries. We've adopted our 2022 meeting schedule. The next up is the appointment of the Emeritus representative. Back to Karen.
Yes, thank you. So We have, the board made a change in the bylaws a year or so ago and basically wanted to recognize folks in the community who had long served on the board, that there might be some interest in sort of keeping them involved because of their historic memory and their interest in the activities of the Transportation Policy Board. So basically, the chair brings that recommendation to the full council. The emeritus representative serves as a full voting member for the first 2 years of a term, and then they can be appointed for subsequent terms. In subsequent terms, they can make motions and second motions, but they are not voting members in that. And really that's to keep a balance, to make sure that we have not too many members that are voting. And so the chair is recommending that we consider Pete Komet as an emeritus representative. As you remember, for when we honored him just recently and celebrated his time with us, he has been with the board a really long time and very active in our efforts. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Chair, for a motion.
So it would be my motion that we appoint Pete Komet to emeritus representative.
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Welcome back, Pete.
Good to see you, Pete. All
Yeah,
in
how was
favor?
your retirement?
Yeah. Right back into it. Everyone in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 Is anyone opposed? And that motion carries. Thank you, Pete, for your continued service to the Transportation Policy Board.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
So next up on our agenda is the High Capacity Transportation Study Subcommittee appointments. Looks like this is Katrina.
Good morning, everyone. So this should be pretty short, but essentially we have a high capacity transportation study that TRPC is going to be working on. And part of that project does call for the formation of a steering committee made up of TPB and council members. Because high capacity transportation is really geared towards the Lacey Olympia Tumwater area. And I think to some extent, as Yelm grows, we want to be looking at how that interacts with it as well. We really want to be have those steering committee members made up of those partners, as well as intercity transit, since they are essential in the formation of any transportation system in the area. I kind of glossed over most of the staff report, but this is a project where for staff here at TRPC, we are really looking to build our skill set and be able to support intercity transit in its efforts. As our community grows, our region grows, we're really going to need to be on the ball about how we can support high capacity transportation in this region. So we do have, the first part of this project is really looking for a roadmap of how do we even approach this from a MPO standpoint or an RTPO standpoint, and how do we support the work that our partners are doing in that realm. So we do have a consultant on board that's really going to be helping us guide us through that process and helping us understand how to move forward on things. So the ask today is that you all approve the formation of a subcommittee to act as a steering committee for the high capacity transportation study. Now, from what I understand is we are still at the start of the year, and so not everyone has been appointed to Transportation Policy Board at this point in time from each of the jurisdictions and partner agencies. And so, if this needs to hold off for a month before we can actually move to form that, that's okay. But just that's the information out there, and I'm happy to answer any questions I can.
Well, I would add one more piece to that, Katrina, which is when we'd been talking internally and with some key stakeholders in this, there was discussion about a steering committee consisting of representation from Thurston County, Olympia, Tumwater, Lacey, Yelm, and Intercity Transit, and those being the primary members of the steering committee. And we were looking for one representative from each of those entities. And I sent out a request for that. And what I heard back, and completely understandably, was because we were trying to convene it this month, and I heard back, no, you're not going to be able to do that. We haven't made our appointments. That's not going to work. And which is fine. We've talked about that and figured that out internally. So today, what Katrina is looking for is really just approval of that concept of having this steering committee and having the members be comprised of those entities that I just listed.
Move approval.
Well, there's a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, and let's have some discussion. So are you looking for those members to be made up from the Transportation Policy Board, or is it between the board and?
Between the board and council, yes. And that's why we heard, hey, we're not ready for that yet, because it will be a matter of each of those jurisdictions talking amongst themselves, deciding whether it should be the policy board member or the council member that serves on this committee.
Okay, so there's a motion and second to form this high capacity transportation committee, and we're gonna wait off until next month to decide who the representative is going to be.
Correct.
Okay, Don.
I just had one question. When I read the background, it wasn't totally clear to me what you're going to be doing, and it sounds like from what you said just now that that's yet to be formulated a bit. Is that correct? I mean,
I think to some extent that's absolutely true. We know that high capacity is important. Intercity transit, it's already moving forward on trying to establish that, especially through the one. And as the MPO, RTPO for the region, TRPC needs to up its game, and we need to make sure that we are there able to support intercity transit or any other entity that's looking to establish high capacity transportation in the region and connecting to other places. And since we're novices at this point in time, that's where this study comes into play. This is going to help us understand the ropes that we're going to have, or the hoops we're going to have to jump through at WashDOT and at federal agencies, what pots of money are available out there, who can apply for them, and also increase internally staff's ability to support those projects. So through modeling and other things.
So did we get a grant to do this?
Yeah, so this was funded through, I believe, STP. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bina.
That's right. It's not a grant. This was a decision made by, recommended by policy board and made by council to use surface transportation block grant funds for this.
I'm going back and trying to remember when we did that. Did we do that during the last funding cycle?
Yes, last funding cycle.
I'm just curious, what is the budget order of magnitude?
Ooh, good question. I think it's $150,000, but let me look that up and get you a firm answer really quick.
Because, you know, the one thing that we haven't talked about at all is if we're going to look at the I-5 corridor as for a high capacity transit, and if we were going to do that, we better get on the ball for at least on the planning side of things, because we're in the process of trying to do all the design work, beginning stages of design work for that. And so if we're going to include a high capacity transit, either a separate another corridor or rail at some point, then yeah, we're behind the game on it for sure.
This is Paul. It was $173,000 award.
You're faster than I am.
I do want to clarify, we're not going to be looking at specific alternatives. We're really just queuing ourselves up to how to look at it. But for what you're talking about with I-5, Chair Ryder, that's certainly something we would ask DOT to include as they do the alternatives analysis through the Nisqually Delta. So there's an opportunity there to have that. There's an opportunity to have specific projects move forward in other venues, but this is really a broader step back of what is our role as a regional agency and how can we poise ourselves to help all our partners as we move forward as a region.
Okay.
Which is why it's a modest amount of funding compared to doing a full environmental impact statement or alternatives analysis.
Yeah, I feel like we're pretty far away from that, for sure.
Thanks for the clarification.
Is there any other conversation? And it's been.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
go-
I think this might just be way too early in the conversation. But I was reading a report a few days ago where they're expecting, because we just talked about the first and last mile on autonomous vehicles at our last meeting, with no expectation and date of when that's actually going to happen. And I just saw something, and I can't remember where I saw it, where they're looking at about 2030, which is what, 18 years from now, which comes around real fast. So maybe that's something that needs to be thrown in the mix, because if they're saying 2030, that means there's got to be a phase in as well.
Yeah, I think obviously this committee is going to look at all those options. It sounds like we just need to get started on looking at how we're going to bridge sort of the gap between us and DuPont. And I know that's been talked about for a long time, but we're actually, looks like we're starting to get serious on a couple alternatives for sure, if it's not rail. So.
Well, the bridge between and Pete, maybe you can remember this as well. The problem that we've always had with the bridge between DuPont here is that up north wanted to take the autonomy away from Thurston County and be in control of everything. So it's something that we need to be careful with.
Is there any other discussion?
Well, this is Pete. I just wanted to add in, we talk about the I-5 alignment, but depending on where the stops are and how many, getting across the Delta is one thing, but I think taking it down, Pacific Avenue or wherever, I think is going to be more important in terms of reaching the population that would ultimately be served. Again, depending on where the stops are and how they're set up. But so I don't know if this committee will look at the, a preliminary alignment in any way, or if DOT will be, but I think that's something we need to consider. Is our whole traffic pattern has been, historically was built around Pacific Avenue and Capitol Boulevard. And so I think we want to try to figure out how to serve those areas best. Anyway, that's all I just wanted to say.
Okay, well, there's a motion and a second to form this subcommittee to act as the steering committee for the high capacity transportation study. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 Okay. Is there anyone opposed? Then that motion carries. And next month we'll figure out who will actually go on that committee.
Thank you.
So next up is the 2022 election of officers process. Back to Karen.
You're muted.
Saw that. Thank you, John. Obviously, this is another one of our first of the year kinds of agenda items. And because we don't have all the appointments in order from the jurisdictions and other members, we wait until February to do the actual election. But in January, we like to talk about basically the process here. So the process is that we do not need to have written nominations sent in advance. If you are interested in filling one of these roles, then you certainly can let us know, and you can send that information to me, or you can nominate yourself, or you can nominate others at our meeting next month. We have a chair, a vice chair, and in recent history, we have added a second vice chair position. So those are all open. The chair and second vice chair have let us know that they are willing to continue to serve. So Andy and Danny are both interested in serving on the board. And so basically you can let people know in advance, or next month we can just take the nominations that come in. And
I
these
just want to
are,
let, I just want to let the board know that I did reach out to Renee, and she's said she'd be interested in being the second vice chair. So I just want to let everyone know about that, and I appreciate you your interest in that, Renee.
and Danny has expressed interest in moving to the first vice chair position. And so that's what we know. So do all your background work between now and next month to, if you want to be a board member of the leadership of the board, and be ready to vote next month. There's no term limits on these positions.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay, then we will have those elections next month. Then the next item on our agenda is proposed amendments to the 2022 to 2025 RTIP.
Good morning. I'm Theresa Julius. I don't see you guys very often, but hello. And I'm one of the transportation modelers here and a planner at TRPC. So this agenda item is to review the proposed amendments to the 2022-2025 Regional Transportation Improvement Plan, or the RTIP. First thing we do in January is start making changes. And so the reminder, the RTIP, it's a 4-year list of transportation projects, and we update this annually. And in between the updates, when there's new projects or there's substantial changes to projects, we go through this amendment process. So the City of Olympia has requested amendment to the 2022-2025 RTIP to include 3 new projects. One is, and this is in your staff packet, should be like the last page, has a little more detail on that. So they have an east side pavement preservation project and a west side preservation project, and then State Avenue safety improvements. And this has got some bicycle and pedestrian improvements and plus resurfacing. So the City of Olympia has secured federal funding for these projects. In order for them to actually receive these funds, these projects need to be amended to the RTIP and then put into the state TIP. So this is the first step for them to get their funds. And these are new projects, so we're doing a formal amendment. And these projects go towards meeting our safety transportation performance measures in the RTIP. We did a 2-week plus public comment period, solicited comment from on our website, and we have not heard anything. That was closed on Monday. And so do you have any questions regarding the amendment? And we do have Sophie from Olympia. She might be able to answer questions.
Yeah, motion, please.
Move approval.
Second.
Been moved and second to amend the 2022-25 Regional Transportation Improvement Program to include the new City of Olympia projects, the Olympia East Side Pavement Preservation, the Olympia West Side Pavement Preservation, and the State Avenue safety improvements, Pear Street to Chestnut Street. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? Then that motion unanimously approves.
Thank you.
So next up on our agenda is to review the proposed funding strategy for sanctioned and redistributed federal funds and provide recommendations to TRPC.
Okay, so good morning. So I'm Vina Tabbitt. We've got at least one new face on the board this morning. So I'm Deputy Director here at Thurston Regional Planning Council. And I've got to say, this is probably the best presentation I'm going to give to you all in the last couple of years or for the next couple of years, because we received extra funding, and that's just a great thing for our region. So Paul, can you forward the slide, please? Okay, so last fall, Mark let you know that we received $1.58 million in sanctioned and redistributed federal transportation funds. That's funds that we can program out to our members for transportation projects. And those funds came, they were sanctioned either from other entities within Washington State, including the State Department of Transportation, or other states where they couldn't get their funds under contract in time by the deadlines. And because we were able to, and I'm going to give a big shout out to all our partners here. Everyone worked really hard to get their projects in and under contract with DOT on time this year. And because of that, we were eligible to receive additional funding, 1.58 million, which is a huge amount of funding for our region. The caveat is, though, that will raise our target, what we have to obligate or get under contract this year. And so because of that, we are bringing forward a list of projects to meet our target. And I'm going to call that the A list, the list that we are recommending to be funded today, or Friday, actually. We're going to ask for your recommendation, but council will make the decision. We also have learned this year, and all these, our policies with the state are somewhat new and how they get applied are somewhat new. But what we learned this year is that if we have a list ready to go by June of each year and submit that to DOT, to the State Department of Transportation, we could capture even more funding. So while we did great this year, there's an opportunity to be even more strategic in the future. And that's what I'm calling our B list. Can you move forward, Paul? Thanks. So how did we come up with our project selection? Well, a few years ago, you all and council worked on adopting a obligation authority policy because we knew this was coming. And in that, we laid out a process for if we did receive additional funds, how would we be ready to go very quickly? And then in the last call for projects, that was a couple years ago, our partners put in projects, and some of them were considered contingency projects, that they went on a contingency list, basically projects that could move forward if we received additional funding. We also pre-approved any pre-approved any project that received funding if they needed more funding, any projects that had already gotten federal funding. So from that list, we worked with our partners to see which of those projects were ready to go this year. So it was a large list, and some of the projects weren't ready to go. When it comes to federal transportation projects, they're in various phases, or maybe partners received funding from somewhere else, that sort of thing. But we did come up with a list of ready to go, pre-approved contingency projects. That's the great news. But it was $5 million worth, and we have $1.5 million for funding. So then we had to figure out how can we decide to distribute that funding. So we chose to work based on our past practice. In the past, we set funding levels based on looking at vehicle miles traveled for our members or transit ridership for intercity transit. We also look at urban and rural minimums, and that's because that's how DOT programs out this type of funding. And then some of our partners put forward more than one project, so we asked them to name their top priority, and so we funded based on their priorities within that. So we came up with a funding recommendation that's in the staff report that we provided to you for the $1.58 million. And we reviewed that with our technical advisory committee, which is made up of the technical experts, the planners and engineers from all our member jurisdictions and partners. And they gave a unanimous recommendation that we move forward with the funding strategy that's in the staff proposal. And many of our members, our TAC members, are here today. So if you've got any questions of them, they possibly would be willing to answer them. I don't want to speak for them, although I just did. Okay, and then in the staff report is also that B list. I mentioned that briefly earlier, but that is, we're saying, okay, so we know we have this funding need, and our partners have said these projects are ready to go. So by June of this year, or whenever DOT asks for the list, we will submit that list, that project list. They will then see if there's available funding from, and it's quite a complicated process. First, we have to meet our state's target. So it's not just about us, it's how we're doing statewide. And then they can see if other states are not meeting their targets and ask for funding. If everything falls into place the way we hope it was, they will let us know there's additional funding and we can get the rest of the list funded. And so knowing that that's the new process to be able to capture additional funding, we will have a process for generating and submitting this, what I'm calling the B list from now on. In the future, we will be doing a new call for federal funded projects in the fall, and I'll be talking about that in the next agenda item a little bit of this year, and that during that process, we'll develop the next list. So our next steps, after you all give us your recommendation, we will take that to council for their approval. Then we'll send out funding letters to partners very quickly. You just met Theresa. She and her team will be working very hard on making any necessary changes, modifications, or amendments to the regional, and then submitting them for the state transportation improvement plan to get all our paperwork in order on our end. And then our members will obligate their projects by July 2022. And they have all, I want to emphasize this, they have all confirmed and reconfirmed and double confirmed that their projects are ready to go. If something did slide, then we would just pick off this list and move another project forward. And then we would submit that second list, that B list, to DOT in June and hope for additional funding. So with that, we can stop sharing and I can take any questions and ask him, Paul or Karen or members of the TAC.
Let's start off by getting the motion, please.
Okay, so moved.
Second.
Then moved and second to adopt these recommendations and approve the funding strategy as outlined by the staff. Discussion. Pete.
Just a question, I guess a couple of questions. First, Vina, could you explain the phase, just because we have a new member here, what those acronyms mean?
I can, absolutely. And I'm sorry for neglecting that. For members of this board, acronyms are our Achilles heel for the Transportation Policy Board. So please do what Pete Komet just did and let us know if there's something that's unclear. I feel like it's a little bit of a fire hose this meeting for some of this federal stuff, but this programming out for transportation funding is one of the primary responsibilities of this board. So it's a very, very important aspect of the board. So when we talk about phases, there's 4 phases. PL is an acronym for planning. So those are planning studies that sort of set up what type of projects can be funded. And then for other projects, we have 3 phases. And so it's either planning or it could be a program like the Walk and Roll program that Intercity Transit does would also be a PL. Then for construction projects, we have 3 phases. PE is the first phase. It stands for preliminary engineering. So it's the design phase of the project. Then the next one is right-of-way if it's needed. That's with the right-of-way acquisition, ROW. And then the final one is CN, construction. And those all nest together. So once a project receives federal funding in either the engineering, right-of-way, or construction phase, it's considered federalized for the entire project. Planning is a little different. It's standalone, so it doesn't federalize projects that come after it.
Good, thank you. Thank you, I appreciate that. And then I just want to make a comment. I know we've discussed the intercity transit propane fueled buses or vans before. I still have a concern that this is not consistent with where the state is going. I think it's probably not going to be competitive for that reason. But, you know, I understand why Intercity Transit has put that in. They feel they don't have the technology available right now for electric vans. But that's, I think that project will likely not be competitive for that reason. So.
I have quick questions about the Patterson rehabilitation, expansion, and modernization. For some reason, I thought that was fully funded already. Don, do you have some more information about that?
We have quite a few intercity transit staff here as well.
Okay. I thought that was fully funded through the last initiative and other funds.
If I may, it is far from fully funded.
Okay.
At a point in time, the federal government would provide 80% of the funding for the purchase of revenue vehicles and construction projects, and that changed around 2011. So we have been struggling and continuing to seek funding for the Patterson Street facility. The election actually didn't, the November 2018 ballot actually didn't include the cost for the Patterson Street facility. And costs have risen significantly since that time. So we continue to seek funding from state legislature as well.
How far off are you on fully funding that, Ann?
You know, for specific numbers, I don't know if Eric has those, if he can hop on, or we can get back to you with those numbers.
I was just wondering, are you close? Is this going to put you over the top, or are you still looking for funds?
We are still looking for funds. I think we have exhausted our ability to go for federal funding, but as I said, we are still looking for funding from the state legislature.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was mistaken on that.
I'd only add that, you know, I think the problem we're dealing with at Patterson has been around for a long time, and we've been fighting for a long time to basically accumulate the funds to get it done. And it was pretty imperative that we do it. So that's.
Yeah, there's no doubt it's a very important project. I guess I just, for some reason, I thought it was part of the funding strategy that when we went out for the voters, but I was obviously mistaken on that. Is there any other discussion? Then we have a motion and second to approve this funding strategy. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 Is there anyone opposed? Then that motion carries. Before we obviously have had a ton of flooding that's gone on in and around Thurston County. Have we done a study? Has there been a study of that, of where the areas are most flooded, and what can we do in this region to maybe prevent some of that flooding going forward? Has that been looked at? I mean, it seems like more and more we're seeing flooding happening, and it's like we're caught off guard every single time, it seems like.
Yes, Chair, we have a study scoped out to look at that. We chose to move forward the detour routes instead. You know, maybe we would have flipped the order if we had the flooding the day we were making that internal recommendation. But the detour route seems so important with all the shutdowns we've had on I-5. But we imagine that would move forward. We would propose that as a study for funding in our next call for projects. So it's absolutely on our mind and one of our unfunded projects. So, and I will say, Paul and his team are working on the hazard mitigation plan update and some emergency disaster response work. So there is also a lot of other work going on within our agency and within the region on that sort of thing. But yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's just obviously it's been on my mind quite a bit lately with all the flooding that we have, and it just seems like becoming more and more frequent these days. So I appreciate that update. So next up on our agenda is our outgoing board member recognition, and good to see you, Graham. Come on. I thought we were going to miss you this morning.
Well, so. Let me explain my absence. I have to testify at the legislature a little later this morning, and so I was both going over the wording but also expanding the font so that you still read it. And so I was concentrating on that, and I'm sure glad Karen called.
Well, I appreciate you jumping on, and appreciate you testifying. This just goes to show how important you've been, not only to the Transportation Policy Board, but to our region for such a long time. So let this policy board know that Graham had served on the Transportation Policy Board for many, many years. He moved here to this area in Lacey in 1956 from Columbus, Ohio. And he attended the Lacey schools, and he was in track, and he was on the swim team, student council, science club, and then went on to Centralia College for 2 years, and then on to WSU. I guess I didn't realize yet you were a
no, Western.
Oh, Western.
My mare.
Sorry, I'm going off of my notes.
Vikings.
Yeah. I think I would have realized that you were a Coug before now. That's why that surprised me. Then you went to serve 4 years in the Air Force. Then after that, you're spent 28 years with employment security, which is a long time, and as a legislative liaison as well. Was on TRPC for represented TRPC for the interstate transit from 1998 to 2005, and served on Transportation Policy Board from 2005 all the way up until very recently, where he was our vice chair in 2014, and just this past year, as we all know, that decided that he wasn't going to come back and continue to serve. But he has served on so many different committees within the TRBC, Transportation Policy Board, committees and so on. There was Sustainable Thurston. He was on the Energy Work Group lead. He was a member of the Land Use and Blue Ribbon Economic Development panel. So there's of course, his years of service just go on and on and on, starting with on the Lacey Planning Commission, then it was 13 years on the Lacey City Council, and served as mayor a couple different times with the city of Lacey, and then has continued his service and is on the North Thurston Public Schools board. He's also been the chair of the Lacey Chamber of Commerce, the president of Lacey Chamber of Commerce. He's on the Generations Credit Union board, the Thurston Climate Action Team. Very involved in Rotary for many years, and been instrumental in the Lacey Loves to Read campaign, as well as the Thurston Climate Action Team. And so one of the things that I've been most, everyone knows how much Graham has meant to not only the city of Lacey, but this region. And the fact that he still just keeps going and going and going is a huge testament to the person who's Graham. I obviously, Graham, you know how much I've admired you for such a very long time. I had nominated him for the Spirit of the Lacey, which is award, which is our highest award that we give off to the Lacey City Council a couple of years back. And the work he continues to do with the Lacey Makerspace has really changed our entire area around innovation in Lacey. It's something that we talk about on how we can be more innovative, but Graham looks at opportunities out there and finds ways to actually make them a reality. And the Makerspace is a prime example. It would not be here today if it wasn't for Graham early on saying, hey, we're seeing these makerspaces come out, in other places across the United States. We need to have one here in Lacey. And he just worked it and worked it and worked it. And we've been able to have this great funding strategy. And it wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for you, Graham. There's no doubt in my mind that was the case. And so it's on one hand really sad to see you go because you meant so much. But we also know that you're still going to be very active. Obviously, you're still going to be testifying to the legislature. So that doesn't surprise me at all. And but more importantly, I just want to thank you for everything you've done. You've set a huge example for public service in our community, and I don't think there's ever going to be another Graham Sagerson who's given so much for such a long time to the community. So from the bottom of my heart, Graham, thank you so much for all you've done, not only for the Transportation Policy Board, the City of Lacey, but for our region.
Well, thank you for your very kind words.
Don, do you have something?
I just wanted to add a personal thank you because you may not remember, Graham, but way back when I first moved to Lacey about 18 years ago, I was looking for opportunities to serve, and I think I met with you. You encouraged me to apply for the Planning Commission, which I did do. And plus, I think the one thing you didn't cover, I think, Graham, you were on the North Thurston School Board more recently, as I recall. So that's
Yes.
another But thank you very much.
And Mr.
Mark?
Chair, if I may, just from a staff perspective, Graham, you are one of those people that we truly admire. You're everywhere. I mean, that's one of the things that I would say as when I think you reached out to me before I even had a chance to reach out to you when I came onto this job. And the mayor mentioned opportunity, and that I think that's such a great word for you, because that's what you, when I came in, you said you were talking about the Lacey Makerspace, making sure I understood the importance of the climate adaptation plan that we were working on at the time, and that we needed to keep going to get a climate mitigation plan. And you were talking about transit, and you have so many ideas and the drive to make them a reality, like the Lacey Makerspace. And you've been so supportive of our staff, of our work, of TRPC, and of a regional approach to helping our communities. I admire you greatly, and thank you so much for your service to the region. We will miss you.
Thank you again for your kind words. And I will actually miss TPB. But as time goes by, I'm finding that there is sort of a limit on what you can do and how many things you can be engaged in. And I'm actually working on some new stuff. So
surprise, surprise.
And
Danny, do you have
for example, they are resurrecting the Lacey Spring Fun Fair.
Yeah.
Knock on wood. As well as the barbecue festival from the chamber. And so a ton of different things, but I'll still be paying attention to what you're doing here. Because it's important stuff. So anyway, thank you very much for the kind words.
Danny, do you have something you want to say?
Yeah. I just wanted to build off of what Mark said of like, Graham, you're everywhere. I was trying to think about when you and I met, and I can't even remember. I'm sure it was something climate related, but I've just seen you all over the place since then. And it's just been really wonderful to serve with you in this capacity on the Transportation Policy Board. And I am looking forward to continuing to see you around and see what you do next.
Okay.
Thank you. John?
One of the things that we're not talking about is, well, I haven't said yet, is that I've known Graham for decades, long time. Well, unfortunately for him, he's known me that long too. I watch people, I've always watched people, and Graham is one of the nicest people in Thurston County, probably in the Tri-County area. And I think that's why he's so involved in everything. It's just in his heart. When you sit down and you talk with Graham, that's what you get. You get a heartfelt conversation. It's even if you disagree on stuff, you always walk away as a friend with Graham. At least I've always walked away as a friend with Graham, and we've had conversations many times. It's been a little while since we've sat down and had coffee, so we'll have to do that again. But this is just one of the nicest people that you will ever meet in this area. Thank you for being a friend, Graham.
Thank you, John.
Absolutely, Graham. You set just an amazing example on how to lead with your compassion, with your insight. You know, we can go on and on and on about all the amazing things that you've done. And I know you're still going to be around, so this isn't goodbye, but this is a big heartfelt thank you for all your time on the Transportation Policy Board. And we will miss you, but we know that you're still doing great things and still going along. It's good to see that the alternative fare is coming back, and I know that was you've been a big part of bringing that to our region to begin with. So it's good to see it come back, and I look forward to hopefully helping to participate and help you in that as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'm sure that we have a outgoing plaque or something that we'll get to you from the Transportation Policy Board. Okay, next up is our call for projects update. Lena.
Hi again. Hopefully you remember me from 20 minutes ago. All right, so I am here to talk to you about the update for our federal call for transportation project. So we just talked about having a project list, and as I mentioned, we developed that from our last call for projects. But we have been working for the last year or so on updating our call for projects, of the process of how we select projects for funding. We gave you a briefing in April of last year of a proposed overview, which you gave us a nod to move ahead with. And since then, we've been working with the Technical Advisory Committee and other stakeholders on the update. And we've also undertaken a very broad transportation priority survey to inform the call for projects update and other key stakeholder outreach. We thought that would take a few months. It took many more months because we really extended it for deeper outreach, and Katrina and Every will be coming to you next month to talk about that and the results of that. But we felt that was well worth the effort. It has delayed us a little bit, but now we're ready to come back and bring the components of the call for projects update to you all. So we'll be giving you and the council briefings through the winter and spring of this year. And hopefully we will have the process adopted by the end of the spring. And then in the fall, we will get our next call for projects started and hopefully get that funding allocated out by the end of the fall, early winter. Okay, next slide, please, Paul. So I'm gonna back up a little bit and talk about why we're doing this, because it's been a long time since we've come and talked to you about the process update. But some of the main reasons are we wanted a more direct tie to our performance goals and targets that we have as a region. We wanted to make sure that when we were programming out the federal funds for transportation, they supported our regional goals and things that we really believe in as a region, and some of the targets that have been set. We wanted to provide a competitive process, that's the federal requirement, with clear and transparent project eligibility and evaluation criteria. What I mean by the second half of that sentence is we want our project partners who submit the projects to be able to see how their projects will be ranked up front. We want it very clear to them so that they can submit projects with the best chance of being funded right from the beginning. And we also want to continue to position our region to meet our obligation targets. I talked a little bit about that, how important that is, because hitting our obligation targets means that we don't lose money. When I talked about sanctioned and redistributed funds, what I didn't say is because we met our target, we did not get sanctioned, which is really a baseline goal. And then getting redistributed funds is the next goal. Okay, so our general concept, just to give you a quick overview, we have project priorities. When we talked to you last time, we had 5 project priorities: safety, efficiency, maintenance, resiliency, and active transportation. And then as we were developing the transportation priority survey, we realized planning didn't really fit within any of those. And so we've added that as a specific project goal. These are all types of projects that have been eligible in the past. We're just being more explicit about the types of projects they are, instead of lumping them all into where we are. Formerly, we just had safety, efficiency, and maintenance. Then we will rank those projects, those eligible types of projects, by our regional priorities. This is where our goals come in. We have set 4 goals. One is use the federal funding as efficiently as possible. The second one is support our sustainable Thurston, which was a very broad regional visioning study we undertook that finished up in about the end of 2013. Support our goals there for robust and healthy corridors and centers. We have also set climate greenhouse gas reduction goals through our climate planning, and those were just reset last year. And we've also talked a lot at this board and with our council and with our partners about setting a goal for equitable distribution of projects among projects, or selecting projects that provide equity for our regional partners. And we'll talk a lot more about that next month. And then finally, we will round out the process with looking at set-asides. So set-asides might mean something like pulling out funding for our rural communities. We've done that in the past, and that's been very successful, and transferring federal funding to local funding to make it easier to spend for some of our smaller jurisdictions like our tribes or our South County cities and towns. We might talk about minimums, and we certainly will talk about funding caps so that not one member gets all our money, that it's spread throughout the region. I should mention on set-asides, some of the set-asides will be required by the federal infrastructure bill. Right now, we have a set aside for active transportation projects or alternative projects, and we expect that to continue, but we are also hearing that there might be some other set asides, and we'll know more about that in the coming months. So we're not quite ready to address this yet. We have to wait to hear some more information from DOT. So I talked about our project priorities. We're going to use those for project eligibility, and we've worked with the Technical Advisory Committee to fine tune that, and that is listed in the detail of your staff report. But for planning, basically we're looking for projects that develop project lists. So we talked just a tiny bit about the flooding. Well, if we do a planning project that looks at areas that are vulnerable to natural hazards like flooding, we could then identify projects off of that, and then they can move forward as projects to be funded later. Or projects that support regional coordination or provide data to inform planning. So that's the sort of planning type of projects. Safety are projects that support our safety targets. We have safety targets for both transit as well as vehicles and multimodal. For traffic and bike and pedestrian safety incidents, we have a target that we will hit 0 incidents by 2030. So it's called Target Zero. And so we are looking for projects that support meeting that goal and those targets. For efficiency, we have a couple things there that we're looking at. One are projects that support meeting adopted level of service targets. We as a region have set level of service targets. And so projects like that might be funding a roundabout in a congested area to have traffic move more, flow better. Or projects that decrease vehicle miles traveled and support travel demand management. So projects that remove people on our congested areas by reducing the need to travel. For maintenance, we've always supported maintenance in our region, and we have what is called a best first approach to pavement maintenance, where we try to keep our roads in a state of good repair because it's less costly to do that. It's less costly to do maintenance at shorter intervals, but less maintenance like a chip seal than to rebuild a road. Of course, we do have some roads that have fallen out of a state of good repair that do need rebuilding. And so there is some portion of our funding that might go to that. But maintenance is a high priority. And there's also maintenance involved in transit asset management, really replacement of vehicles. And you see that in the contingency list of projects that we brought forward. And also we want to keep our bridges and sidewalks and other infrastructure in a state of good repair. Resiliency, those are the type of projects that address things like hazards like flooding. How do we create a system where if some roads flood, we have other ways around them, or detour routes around I-5. So if we have traffic incidents, what type of projects would support that? So we have a couple planning projects in the hopper to then identify more resiliency projects. And then finally, last but not at all least, are our active transportation projects. We have always had a very strong support for active transportation projects. Those are projects that support walking and biking, so sidewalks and safe crossings, and there'll be some redundant or overlap between these projects. We've always supported them, but we're just making them an explicit category this time. So for regional priorities, we set the 4 regional priorities I talked about earlier. So the numbers underneath the boxes, I mentioned that we just finished up a transportation priority survey, and we asked folks on the survey how important is the achievement of using federal funding efficiently or supporting urban corridors and centers to you? And for those respondees that answered that it was somewhat or very important, that's the percentage you're going to see below there. So the support for these goals. As you can see, the efficient use of federal funding received the strongest support at 98%. So pretty much across the board, people felt like that was a very important goal for us to have. Equity, 95%, so again, very strong. And also very strong support, even though slightly less, for the supporting urban corridors and centers and greenhouse gas reduction. And I should mention, especially for the urban corridors and centers, this survey went out and we heard from people who live both in the urban areas and the rural areas throughout our region. So having 90% support is really, it really shows strong support for these goals. And so we feel that we are good to move forward with these 4 goals. All right, so to talk about efficient use of federal funding, why we felt like that was a good goal for us. Federal funding comes with a lot of requirements, and that raises project costs. And there are some projects that are simply a better fit for federal funding than others, just the way the program's set up. And I will say in general, road construction projects are an example of that because that's the way the funding is set up. But next slide, please, Paul. But there's also a nuance within that of funding levels. So if you don't receive enough funding, it doesn't make sense to federalize your entire project. So it doesn't make sense to ask for, say, $100,000 of federal funding for a $5 million project because it's going to raise the amount of things you have to do on that project, and the federal funding won't offset it. So we worked with our technical advisor committee, and I can't say enough for the great work that those folks do. Those are the planners and the engineers from our local jurisdictions and partners. And they have so much experience with these types of projects, and they helped us come up with categories. And so we ended up with a scale of 4 categories, 2 points given to the best use of federal funds, and then 1 point for the ones just below, 0 points if it's somewhat neutral, and then if it's not an efficient use of federal funds, and I think the example in there was just not enough money for a construction project to make it the one I just gave you, then it would receive a -1. Okay, so that was our first criteria. Our second one was looking at the Sustainable Thurston goal. So Sustainable Thurston really was a visioning project that asked our countywide, how do we want to look, feel, and function by 2030? And we came up with visions for our corridors and centers in the North County, our South County communities like Bucota, Tenino, and Rainier, and Grand Mound and Rochester, our neighborhoods. So those are the areas surrounding our centers and corridors, as well as our rural lands. So it was an all-encompassing vision, but not a one-size-fits-all, a very context-sensitive vision. One of the goals that was set was that we would locate 72% of our urban area housing within a half mile of an urban center, corridor, or neighborhood center by the end of the planning period, or 2035. And that was an ambitious goal. And when our Buildable Lands team looked, which was a project that we undertook last year, when they looked back at how we were doing, we hadn't made much headway on that. And when they projected out how we probably will do in the future, they said, we're probably going to fall short of our goal. And so then we said, well, what can we do to reach our goal? And one of those things is investing in these areas. And some of the investments we can make are transportation investments. So that's why syncing that up with our call for projects was really important. The type of projects that can support our land use goals, any planning projects that look at our neighborhood centers, urban corridors, or urban centers, neighborhood centers. And examples like that would be the Martin Way Corridor study, where we're really looking at how can we make the Martin Way Corridor a primary arterial that links downtown Olympia with Lacey, and how can we make that function and support a greater mix of activities, including housing. Safety projects in areas really help because they make the areas much more attractive to live in, and certainly improving safety is important for many, many aspects. As that goes along with intersection and street improvements, and active transportation projects, like there's going to be overlap between some of these projects, but if we can improve our bicycle or pedestrian facilities, including safe crossings, that will make these areas much more attractive for folks to live in and absolutely safer. That goes along with things like bus stop enhancements, because transit is a huge component of getting our corridors and our city centers to be provide a wide range of ways of getting around. As well as any other improvements for transit route infrastructure. You might ask what else that would be besides bus stop enhancements. Well, something like having a small, what we call a queue jump, a little bit of a place for a transit bus to get around a congested intersection might be an example of that. And then working on getting our signals coordinated and working with our transit buses, also really important aspect in these areas, as well as maintenance projects. So those are types of projects that can support our land use goals. We also, so working with both our long range planners, so there's a group that meet as well. So as well as our engineers and transportation planners, our land use long range planners meet quarterly. Working with that group, as well as our technical advisory committee, we sorted projects into 4 categories: ones that are most supportive of sustainable Thurston land use goals. So really those types of projects I just listed that are located within an urban corridor center, and I'll show you a map in a second. The next level down is a broader geographic area. So it includes our neighborhood centers. And then the next one would be the type of projects I listed above, but not necessarily in those areas. And then negative points if it didn't support the land use goals. And I want to step back a little, and you might say, well, what about rural projects? Rural projects are not going to get any points in here. I did mention earlier that we'd have set-asides, and we will have set-asides for rural projects. So they will be evaluated on their own, and so they won't it won't really hold it against them that they won't have points in this category. And so this is the map that we developed, and it's being reviewed by our long-range planners and our TAC, but it syncs up with the local comprehensive plan as much as we can get it to. So the darker color of orange is our core areas, our neighborhood centers and corridors. And then the lighter yellow is our neighborhood centers, those areas within our neighborhoods where we're hoping to have some access to goods and services, maybe a small store or that sort of thing. So you can see all of our, both in the North and South County, we have areas identified. We will be open to making changes to that as we move forward. This is certainly a map that when you dive in deeply, there might be some nuances, but we do want to stick with adopted comprehensive plans as much as possible. Okay, and then the final category I'm going to talk to you about today is meeting our greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. We set those at, we want to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to 85% below 215 by 2050, I'm sorry. And so we, again, just like the other two, we sorted projects into 4 categories. Those where greenhouse gas reduction is a primary purpose of the project, we're going to have the most gains with greenhouse gas reduction. Ones that might have a gain in greenhouse gas reduction, or probably will. Ones that are unlikely to increase or neutral projects, and then ones that would receive a negative point if they were likely to increase greenhouse gas reduction. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so that was it for the first 3 criteria that we've worked on. So I'm just going to finish up the PowerPoint and talk about what's coming next, and then we can take questions. So coming next is equity. We are going to be working through our draft criteria with our technical advisory committee next week, actually at TAC. And then next slide, please. And then we'll work on our final piece, so set-asides and funding caps and things like that once we get more clarity from DOT on how much funding and what parameters we're working within for their next call for projects. So next slide, please. So our next step, like I said, equity goals and the funding set aside, then we'll take the entire process out for public comment. Then we'll be coming to you for a recommendation and council for approval. And then we should be ready to go with our next call for projects in the fall of next year. Okay, I threw a lot of information at you, and so I am willing to take questions now, and Paul and Karen are here to also help with that. Yeah.
Sure. Don?
Yeah, you mentioned frequently the Technical Advisory Committee. I just wondered how frequently that group meets. Because I think when we got initially started on this tack of an enhanced process, one of the goals was to involve sort of the technical aspect in a significant way.
So the TAC has meetings on their schedule for every 2 weeks. So they're a really hardworking group, although I will say in the summers, but during construction season, we tend not to meet much because they are so focused on other things. So we've been bringing pieces of this to them. And yeah, every piece that you see will be reviewed by them, if not once, at least twice, and is heavily crafted by their input.
You hope to have them meet every 2 weeks is what I'm hearing. Is that?
Yeah,
that
it's
hasn't been
scheduled for every.
possible in the past?
It's scheduled for every 2 weeks. They don't always meet to talk about this topic, but they do meet. We schedule them to meet every 2 weeks. Of course, we cancel a meeting if there's nothing to meet about.
Thank you.
Don, I would just add that the TAC meeting agendas are posted on our website. So if any of the policy board members did want to follow along with what the TAC is previewing before you, that's the place to go looking for meeting material packets.
Thank you.
And they're the ones that dig into all those details that are in the back of your staff report, making sure we're getting each project type in the right category, that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Danny?
I'm curious about, what we can look forward to with the equity criteria, in terms of timeline and, what is the TAC doing, like anything you can share in terms of like what kind of resources they're using to build that criteria, what they're looking at. Are they looking at other jurisdictions? Can you just speak a little bit to that, please?
Yeah, so I'll be taking that to them next week, and we've got two primary resources, just literature for what makes sense, as well as the Transportation Priority Survey. I will be bringing it to you, or someone will be bringing that to you next month, so you'll have a chance to dig in. And also, if you would like to see the preliminary criteria, as Paul said, that should actually be available in their package, so you can take a preview there.
Pete?
Yeah, I had one comment and I guess a question. I think one of the things that you should include in the final presentation is which streets are eligible for this funding. My understanding is only a limited number of streets are available, and so I think that's important for this group to have that perspective. I am a little concerned about the criteria related to city centers, and that it appears to leave out Old 99, which, believe it or not, is now becoming essentially an extension of Capitol Boulevard for us with all of the housing in that area. So I'm a little concerned about that from my Tumwater perspective. But then on a more regional basis, I understand the reason for trying to get roads paved before they fall apart. But I think all of the jurisdictions are faced with the challenge of having annexed rural areas, county areas that have roads that are really below standard. They have no base on them. They're pretty narrow. I hope that the criteria doesn't eliminate the ability to go in and at least add, reconstruct some of those roads, add shoulders, bike lanes or whatever for those.
No, those sorts of projects will absolutely be eligible, Pete. Don't worry about that. I do want to just give a comment back to the road eligibility and clarify that a little bit for our board. So on what Pete was talking about is under the majority of the funding we receive, the Surface Transportation Program, at least as far as we know, in the next round of funding, it won't change. It has to be a road of a certain classification, and so essentially a pretty high level road like an arterial to be eligible for federal funding or above. However, one of our set asides, you can do other types of projects on other types of roads. And so those are some of the details we'll sort out with those set asides and funding caps and be very clear about that, because we'll be programming out money into those different pots. So yes, all those details are really going to be very important, and our staff will be working very hard on making sure that's clear for folks.
Thank you. Appreciate that. One other thing I would suggest the TAC look at is, we know that the major trail systems, Chehalis Western and Yelm Tenino, are the pavement's reaching a point where it really needs to be replaced. I don't know if we should actually just set aside a block of money. I don't know how much it would take to do that. It's a fairly narrow project, so we might be able to get a lot of paving done for a small amount of money. I just don't know, but I think it would be helpful to know what would it take to, if we set aside several $100,000 there to just get that done, if that would be sufficient, or if it's something much bigger in scope than that. So
thank you. Okay, Paul can work with our county partners to relay that and see if they can come up with an estimate.
Yeah, just real quick, as part of the Trails Plan update, we are asking trail managers sort of what they do have programmed, if anything, for pavement preservation projects on shared use trails. So that could help get to that answer, Pete. I don't know if we'll have it by this fall ready to go, but the TPB could certainly take a crack at an initial set aside if it was in the interest to do so.
Thank you.
And that's something we'll be talking about with the set asides. If there are priorities that you all feel that money should be set aside for, that is absolutely part of this process. So be thinking about those great ideas.
Yeah, there's our trail network is getting, we've talked about this just recently, it's getting pretty old, and we've major ruts going over on the Karen Fraser Woodland Trail and the Chehalis Western Trail and parts, and we haven't seen a ton of reinvestment back into those trails in a long time. So I think that's definitely worthy of a conversation on how we're going to continue to maintain those major trails. Is there any other discussion?
I would also add, if I can jump in, a little bit of my usual rant, which is if you have a chance to talk to your federal delegation, it's our belief that a lot of the rules that are put in place and the reporting that's put in place by the federal government in the funding they provide does not necessarily contribute to the project in a meaningful way. So often it feels like there's a lot of red tape, and does it make it a better project? So I think we constantly have to be aware that when we're talking about equity or anything else, that especially for small jurisdictions, for poor jurisdictions that don't have a lot of staff, for example, they miss out on the opportunity for federal funding because they can't do reporting and meet certain criteria. And so I think it's always important to say, if you have influence at the federal government level, to mention that this is really hard to do and that it doesn't necessarily add to the value of the project.
That is definitely the concern, right? Is that we're adding more criteria here that could, in some ways, add to the cost of these federal funds. And so we have to be careful there. So as it's already very expensive to use federal funds, it's ridiculously expensive to use federal funds. In many cases, it doesn't make sense if there's duplicate things you have to do. We just had this conversation where NEPA and SEPA, where our SEPA requirements in many ways are stronger than the NEPA requirements, and yet you have to do both, which adds a considerable amount of expense and with no real benefit, to except having to do that additional reporting. So, I think we should always try to find ways to cut some of that red tape, and if we can, where it makes sense for sure. And so it would be interesting to hear from the TAC on how much more time they think it's going to take them to apply under these new rules compared to what it was under the old rules. And is there any way we can make that part more efficient as well?
Oh, as far as our call for projects, we actually, our process will probably be pretty streamlined and very just check the box as much as possible. But our intention is not to make it more cumbersome, just to be more focused on the types of projects that are brought forward.
That's good to know. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, we'll go on to our, I guess it's our last item, which is our outside committee reports. Do we have an outside committee report today? I don't think we do.
This would normally be when the Puget Sound Regional Council TPB update would come from Doug DeForest, but my first meeting representing TRPC is tomorrow, so I'll have
Great.
something for you next month.
Well, with that, we've reached the end of our agenda. Is there anything else for the good of the order?
I think we should always schedule them until 9 so that we actually end by 8:30.
Well, it's good sharing, right? To get through the 2-hour agenda as fast as we did. It's really, but I just want to say again, thank you, Graham, for everything, all your service to the Transportation Policy Board, and we'll see you around. And with that, without objection, I'll call this meeting adjourned.
Non-debatable motion.
Thank you.
Y'all have a good day.